challenged with the word priest is that modern movies have depicted the Roman Catholic Church as the typical expression of a priest. And so most unbelievers see a priest as a person you go to if you want to do business with God, because the priest is the one who intercedes between God and you. Well, on Monday we began looking at the Old Testament book of Zechariah and the idea that Zechariah is a story within the larger story of salvation history. On Wednesday we focused on some of the visions that Zechariah was given by God and saw how these visions spoke about how God would act on behalf of his people. Well, today we'll see that God's action also includes the priesthood. Zechariah 3 verse 1. Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right side to accuse him. The Lord said to Satan, "The Lord rebuke you, Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this man a burning stick snatched from the fire?" Now this image is used in the book of Amos to speak of God judging his people, but saving some who he likened to sticks snatched from the fire. And it's not dissimilar here. However, God's declaration is that it will be Joshua the high priest who God will work through to save his people. Zechariah then describes Joshua's sins as being forgiven, which is preparing him for that task. And then we read this, Zechariah chapter 3 verse 8. "Listen, high priest Joshua, you and your associates seated before you, who are men symbolic of things to come. I am going to bring my servant the branch. See the stone I have set in front of Joshua. There are 7 eyes on that one stone, and I will engrave on an inscription on it, says the Lord Almighty, and I will remove the sin of this land in a single day. In that day, each of you will invite your neighbour, sit under your vine and fig tree, declares the Lord Almighty." Now, there are 2 important images in this passage that I want you to notice. The first is the reference to the branch. Now, the branch, capitalised as it is here in Zechariah, is an image that is used sometimes in the Old Testament to talk about the people of Israel, but most significantly, Isaiah uses this word to describe a shoot that will come from the stump of Jesse. Jesse, who was King David's father. And out of his roots, a branch will come that will bear fruit. Okay, and so this branch was a title that God's people use to describe the coming of the Messiah. Okay, and so Zechariah is given this vision from God that takes the image of the branch and describes a servant like Joshua, okay, perhaps a high priest like Joshua, who is somehow connected to the removal of sin from the land. Now, I'll explore this more on Sunday, but we know that from the New Testament, Jesus is the root from the stump of Jesse, because Jesus says he is the root in the book of Revelation. Okay, and so although Zechariah is speaking to his time, there's a future aspect of this prophecy that will be fulfilled when Jesus dies on the cross and through his sacrifice when sins are forgiven. The second image flows out of the first one, which is of the people of God sitting under a vine and fig tree. Okay, now again in the Old Testament, this is an image of peace and contentment. All right, and so following the removal of sin, we will finally see the people of Israel experience a land of peace flowing with milk and honey. However, they never experience this reality because, like the branch, the image of the vine and fig tree is pointing us to a future point, which we partly experience now through faith, but will fully experience when Jesus returns. Now, friends, that's a lot to take in. Okay, and we'll cover a lot of this on Sunday, but with what we've looked at, why don't you take a couple of minutes to pray and ask God to help you to see that Jesus is the only priest that you need, because Jesus is the only one who perfectly intercedes between God and between human beings.
Who else could rescue me?